Part 1. You will hear a conversation between a printing company employee and a customer. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 5. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 5.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Matrix Printing. I'm John Smith. How can I help you?
Good afternoon. I'm here to reprint a brochure for our hotel. There are some pages that need revising.
Sure. How may I address you?
Oh, I'm Mary Jane from Central Hotel Chains. Nice to meet you. I've got samples of the previous version.
I assume it is your company's advertising brochure.
Yes.
What exactly is the problem?
Well, it was printed the year before, so some of the information is already out of date. There are also a couple of problems with the layout. Firstly, the letters of the address on the front page are far too small. It's hard to see when glancing at the cover.
How big do you need it to be?
Increase the letters by 3 font sizes.
Just a minute. Let me take notes of your requirements. Okay, what else needs changing?
The information regarding the pool should be deleted because it is currently under renovation and is not available.
So, all of the relevant descriptions on page 2 should be removed? What do we replace it with? We can't just leave the whole page blank.
Just fill it in with the introduction of our newly opened gym. I've included all the relevant information here in this flash drive.
Let me check. I see. No problem then.
What is also bothering us is that the description under the top photos on page 4 is incorrect. The word lounge needs to be replaced with reception.
Fully noted. Is that all?
No, there is more. Turn to page 5. We feel that showing merely the picture of our exterior and interior decoration does not fully represent the appeal of our hotel. On second thought, we've decided to use a picture with the view of the hotel.
Do you have the original copy of the picture?
Yes, it is also enclosed in the flash drive.
Okay, we'll re-edit the whole layout of the photos.
Great.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 6 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 6 to 10.
Let's turn to the next page.
Yes. What's wrong with that? It seems perfectly fine to me.
At first sight it seems fine, but according to the feedback of the customers, the prices do not stand out. So, we want to change the print from black to red to make it pop out.
Okay, I've made notes of all of your requests. Is there anything else?
I appreciate it. Just one final request. Could you translate the whole brochure into Spanish? We have customers worldwide, you know, especially those from Latin countries.
No problem. What about other languages, like Japanese, Chinese or German? These are our most popular target languages.
I have to ask the manager about the Chinese version. There's been a surging number of Chinese clients during recent years. However, we don't need German or Japanese translations, as we currently don't have many customers from those two countries.
Sure. Just keep me updated.
So, roughly, when can we get the revised print? We need it before the end of July.
It's late June now. Roughly, it'll take 3 weeks to re-edit. So it will definitely be ready before the deadline.
Great.
To where shall we send the samples?
The address is number 9 Green Drive, Clifton, NY 21300.
How do you spell Clifton?
CLIFFTON. Clifton.
And the telephone number?
It's 9030366602. Also, if you have any further questions, you can reach me through this number.
Okay.
That is the end of part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 2.
Part 2.
You will hear a talk about the history of a poetry award. You have 30 seconds to look at questions 11 to 15.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this year's award ceremony for the Antonia Watson Memorial Poetry Award. As with previous years, the competition has been particularly fierce and we received numerous excellent entries, so it's an incredible achievement for our 3 finalists who are sitting here amongst you, and we should congratulate them all. However, as with every competition, there can unfortunately only be one winner, and we will be announcing them shortly. Before we do, though, a few words about the award itself. As most of you know, the Antonia Watson Memorial Poetry Award has been presented annually since 2010 and was presented biannually for 2 more competitions prior, once in 2008 and once in 2006. It is entirely funded by Antonia Watson's very generous parents, who offer £1,500 to the author of the best poem on a topic announced at each previous award ceremony, as well as £500 to the first runner-up and £250 to the second, bringing the total up to £2,250. Now, a few words on Antonia Watson herself, without whom none of us would be standing here today. I briefly knew Antonia while at university, where we were flatmates for a year, and I'm afraid that any speech I give will not be able to do her justice, as she was the kindest, sweetest person I've ever met. Thankfully, this part of my speech was written with the assistance of one of her siblings, Thomas Watson, who was not only her brother, but also her best friend. Antonia was born in Slayford, Lincolnshire, in December 1986. From a very young age, she displayed an inquisitive and creative nature, matched in volume only by the gentle kindness of her spirit. She wrote her first poem, named Love Barks, about the death of her dog at the age of 10. This was also her first poem to be published at her school's newspaper, just 2 months after another of her poems, Be Kind, won the 1996 Triad Children's Writing Competition and was published in the competition's anthology. While her early forays into poetry were crowned with impressive success, Antonia unfortunately ceased to write for a few years following the death of her very dear grandfather, Peter William Watson, in 1999.
You now have 30 seconds to look at questions 16 to 20.
Despite her writer's block, however, her artistic nature didn't lie dormant during the next 4 years. She had an active role in various theatre plays, and she also ventured into painting. A few of the plays are available on the internet, and you can find several of her self-portraits on our website, and you can see for yourself how impressive they are. But poetry, of course, remained her passion even then, which is why in 2003 she resumed writing, and her next poem, The War on Both Sides, was published in her college's journal. At the age of 18, Antonia moved to Sheffield to study English literature at the University of Sheffield. This is where she and I met, spending a whole year in adjacent rooms in a flat in central Sheffield. This is also where I met her good-natured, generous parents, Mr. and Mrs. Watson, who came to visit her regularly and always treated me like a daughter as well. Antonia and I grew very close during that period, and while we ran in different circles, we always found time for each other every week. Antonia self-published one collection of poems in August 2005. It was named Burning Stars, after the poem on page 16, which is also the date of her birthday. It was an immediate success amongst her peers at the University of Sheffield, and it was so cherished by her English literature classmates specifically that it had attracted the attention of one of her lecturers, who put her in touch with a literary agent. She had been due to begin working on her second collection right before her tragic passing in a car accident just 5 days before her 19th birthday in December 2005. Antonia was always interested in societal shifts and how they affect humanity as well as the environment, and this award was designed to reflect her faith that regardless of what we do, we are all inherently good. With this in mind, all of the topics this competition has dealt with have been about the potential and the positive side of humanity, such as this year's Young Love theme or last year's Inner Power theme. We've had poems about personal strength, about immigration, about gender equality and peaceful protest. And hopefully in 12 months, the poems we'll be awarding will be just as inspiring with the topic of poverty. I know Antonia would be really proud of what her parents and what all of you together have achieved. So, finally, let's get on with the actual award. As I said before, it's been a fierce competition this year, and with more than 5,000 entries, it was quite the task for our 3 judges to cut them down to just 3. But our 3 finalists definitely deserve to be here, and without further ado, I would like to...
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3.
Part 3.
You will hear a conversation between Carlos, Melissa, David and Simona. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 30. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 30. Okay, everyone. Let's look at what presentation tips we come up with for our next seminar, Melissa.
Okay, here's my first tip. Show up early. Some experienced presenters say that something good is bound to happen. I'm not sure about that, but...
Well, you may have a chance to head off some technical problem. Also, at the beginning, before you actually begin your presentation, people filter in slowly. It's a great time to introduce yourself.
Can't argue with that. Simona had some ideas about opening.
Have a strong opening. I picked up a few ideas for structuring your opening. First, never apologise. If you're worried the presentation won't go well, keep it to yourself and give it your best shot. Besides, people are usually too preoccupied with their own problems to notice yours.
I like that.
Open by addressing the following 3 questions. What's the problem? Who cares? What's your solution?
Excellent suggestion. David, you've gone quiet. Well, my next suggestion is PGP. That means that with every subtopic, you should move from the particular to the general and back to the particular. Even though the purpose of a subtopic is to convey the general information, bracing it with particulars is a good way to draw attention and promote retention.
I've got another one. This might not be a tip so much as a law. Give everyone at least one piece of paper. A piece of paper is a record from your presentation. People can use that to help recall the details of the presentation, or better yet, to tell others about it.
The next tip I have is know your audience. This is, of course, a general piece of advice for public speaking. See if you can find out what styles of information a presentation they are most familiar and comfortable with. Adapting your presentation to those styles will leave fewer barriers to the direct communication of your material.
I like that idea. We mentioned possible technical problems before.
Before you listen to the rest of the conversation, you have 30 seconds to read questions.
My next point is that maybe speakers should rethink the overhead projector. Is one really necessary?
I think that often is, but I agree with your basic point, Simona. Don't use one just because it's there. Maybe a good tip is to consider carefully what you're putting on your slides.
Yes, David, that's a very good point to make. Slide content is, well, you don't want too much, too little. Carlos?
Good point, both of you. Another point I have is to respect the audience. Don't condescend by dumbing down your lecture. Show them respect by saying what you believe and what you know to be the whole story.
I also have a point about humour. I think that humour is generally good, but be careful with it. Humour in a presentation works best when it actually drives the presentation forward. If you find you're using canned jokes that don't depend on the context of the presentation, eliminate them. David?
Maybe, Melissa, but always be very careful about jokes that put down a class of people. If you're going to alienate your audience, do it on the merits of your content.
Also, avoid masculine or even feminine pronouns as universals. It can be a nuisance to half the audience. As universals, use the plural they. The Oxford English Dictionary has allowed they as a gender-neutral singular pronoun for years.
Thanks, Simona. Thinking towards the end, take care with the questions. Many people judge the quality of your talk not by the 20 minutes of presentation, but on the 30 seconds you spend answering the question. Be sure to allow long pauses for questions. 10 seconds may seem like a long pause when you're at the front of the room, but it flows naturally from the audience's point of view.
Let people know you believe your material. Speak with conviction. Believing your subject matter is one of the best ways to speak more effectively.
Finish early, and something good is almost bound to happen. If nothing else happens, people will be able to leave early, and suddenly they'll have an extra couple of minutes to do things they didn't think they'd get to. People will really like you if you do that.
I think we have missed the key point. Practice. Practice over and over and over. If you can, record your presentation. play it back and watch yourself. You'll discover 1,000 horrible things you never knew about yourself. Now watch it again without the sound. Why are your hands flying around like that? Now listen to it with the picture. Get rid of those ums. Now watch it at twice the normal speed. This emphasizes low-frequency cycles in your gestures. David, those were excellent points. I have one more, something quite simple, but often overlooked. I read that the two most dehydrating things you can do in a modern civilization are live presentations and air travel. I don't know if it's really true, but the message is that the way to stay sharp is to drink lots of water. Take care of your body, especially your voice. If possible, avoid alcohol too.
So, we've got to organise these points now.
The end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 4.
Part 4.
You will hear a monologue on the subject of the Celts. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40. Welcome to this introductory lecture on the Celts. Who were the Celts? The Celts were an Indo-European group, that is, related linguistically to the Greeks, the Germanic peoples, certain Italic groups and peoples of the Indian subcontinent. They arose in Central Europe at the beginning of the first millennium BC, and were an iron-using and horse-rearing peoples. By the end of the first millennium BC, their cultural group had spread up and down the Danube and Rhine, taking in Gaul, Ireland and Britain, across Central Europe into northern Italy and northern Spain. Their roaming across Europe led some of the Celtic tribes to sack Rome in 390 BC, creating a fear of the northern barbarians that was to haunt Romans for hundreds of years to come. The Celts are defined archaeologically by the type sites of Hallstatt and Latene, the former being taken to relate to an earlier phase of cultural development. Hallstatt, an ancient salt mining area, was excavated from 1876 onwards by the Viennese Academy of Sciences, and provided the first classification of the prehistoric Celts. In 1858, the waters of Lake Neuchâtel in Switzerland sunk to a low level, revealing a large prehistoric settlement with a huge number of surviving artifacts. The nearby town of Latene gave its name to the second phase of Celtic cultural development. However, please note that these phases overlap through time and are defined according to geographical area. Let's look at each of these, taking the Hallstatt first. Hallstatt culture is characterized in 4 stages. A and B were during the Late Bronze Age, from about 1200 to 700 BC. C was in the Early Iron Age, from about 700 to 600 BC. D was from about 600 to 475 BC. The Hallstatt culture spanned Central Europe, with its centre in the area around Hallstatt in central Austria. There were 2 distinct cultural zones, the eastern and the western. At the start of the period, long-distance trade was already well established in copper and tin, the basic requirements for manufacture of bronze. From about 700 BC, trade in iron also became established. The Hallstatt area also already controlled the trade in salt, crucial when there were few other means to preserve food. Control of these two crucial trade goods, iron and salt, provided the basis for the accumulation of wealth and influence. From 800 BC, some burials of rich people can be identified in Central Europe, with grave goods such as wheeled wagons and iron swords. Hallstatt C saw the construction of fortified hilltop settlements to the north of the Alps. These had burial mounds holding very high-quality goods, such as vehicles and expensive imported treasures. By the time of the Hallstatt D period, these increasingly extravagant burial mounds were clustered around a few major hill forts to the southwest of the region. This suggests a development and a concentration of wealth and social power, possibly based on the development of Massilia, present-day Marseille, as a Greek trading port. The expansion of luxury trade brought greater opportunities for profit and helped to create an increasingly stratified society, with the development of a wealthy nobility. Over the period from 1846 to 1863, 1,000 graves were found at Hallstatt, with an astonishing range of artifacts, including clothing and salt mining equipment, as well as weapons, jewellery, pottery, and imported bronze vessels in the chieftains' graves. The Latène era was the time of Celtic expansion and migration, and the time of formation of the myths. The Latène culture is named after the site in Switzerland where it was first discovered. The Latène people were those known to the Romans as Gauls, originally found in an area from eastern France to Bohemia. The Latène culture spread rapidly from about 400 BC. The Latène Celts settled in Spain in 450 BC, in northern Italy in 400 BC, invaded Rome in 390 BC, invaded Greece in 279 BC, invaded Galatia in modern Turkey in 270 BC. By 200 BC, they occupied the lands that are now Britain, the Netherlands, Brittany, Belgium, Germany and Switzerland. There is much debate over how much of the expansion into Britain was achieved through invasion and settlement, and how much was the expression of cultural transfer that accompanied trade and reflected the commonality of kinship and language of many tribes. There is little evidence for actual migration of Latène people into Britain. Nevertheless, it does appear that the Latène culture was more militarily focused than the Hallstatt one. The Latène graves across Europe hold iron weapons, swords and spearheads, and wooden shields, as well as everyday items such as razors, yokes, cauldrons and jewellery.
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.